In the previous video we had a quick look at lists and how they work, how we could add elements to the list, and how we could manipulate the data within lists. Now we're going to take it a step further and look at how we can integrate lists with loops, and they work really naturally together, as we'll see. So here's our example from before with cricket scores in our list. At this time we want to loop through that list and add up all of the elements in it so that we can get a total score. This looping through a for loop gives us a really efficient syntax for doing this, which will adjust the number of times through the loop so that it matches the number of elements in the list. So here you can see we have 5 elements in the list. We have set a variable total equal to 0, and this is the line of code, this one in yellow, that sets up our loop. For score in cricket scores, total is going to be equal to total plus score. So every time we go through the loop, we're going to increase total by whatever's in this variable score. And this variable score we set up in this line. Before we could have used any name we wanted. We could have called it banana, potato, whatever it was, as long as we used the same name there. Of course it's useful to use a name that has some meaning, and in this case the score is pretty relevant. So if we have a look at this now in pythontutor.com, I'm going to step through it just so that we can check exactly what's happening. So as soon as we start, you can see that we create this list here. Just like before, we had the variable names here. This time we've got the list name, and you can see the list elements here along with their index numbers above. We create the total variable set to 0, and now for score and cricket scores we start our loop, and you can see this score becomes a variable here, and the first time through the loop it stores the value 12, which is the first element in the list. Total now becomes 12 because we've added that to it, and the next time through the loop, score is 43, matching the second element in the list. This will continue with the total increasing as we go, and the score variable updating to the appropriate element in the list. And we'll go the whole way through until the last element, and then we've run out of elements in the list, so we finish our loop and we go down to our final line, which will print out the total number of runs, which is 153. Experiment with that code yourself, get your own example working, play around with it and see how it works, and then come back and we'll have a look at a challenge in this video. So you're going to have 2 challenges in this video. The next one will be the guessing game challenge, but before we get to that, you have a challenge to write a program that will use a loop to cycle through a list and find the highest number that's in that list. Then once you've done that, modify your program to find the lowest number, and then finally the average number. You'll have to think about using some variables along the way, just like we had the total variable in the previous example, and hopefully you can figure something out. If you get a little bit stuck, come back to this video and I'll go through an example for you. Welcome back. Here's my example of how we could find the maximum score in a list. So we do have our cricket scores list, and I've set up here a variable called max score, and I've initiated it to 0. It's a good place to start because any score we're going to have is going to be more than 0, so it will replace that maximum score. Then we've got our loop here, and just to illustrate the point that we don't have to use score or anything like that, we can use whatever name we want for this variable. I've called it potato in this case. Now in your examples you're going to want to call it something more appropriate like score or number, but I just wanted to prove the point, so I've used potato in this instance. So for potato in cricket scores, we're saying if the value stored in potato is greater than the max score, we're going to replace the max score value with whatever is stored in potato. We'll go through the loop as many times as we have elements in the list, and then at the end we'll print out whatever is stored in max score. So if I run this code now, you should see that we get the score is 100, which is correct up here. If I change that to 10, the biggest score is now 78. We'll run that again, and it's working as it should. So here we are back in Python Tutor, and I'm going to go through it step by step just so that we understand what's going on, and I have changed the name of this variable back to score so it's more appropriate. Okay, so let's go through the program. We create our list, we initialize our variable to 0, and now for score and cricket scores we're going to go through that loop. So score first of all takes 23, and then we say if that 23 is greater than what's currently in max score, which is 0, we're going to replace what's in max score with what's in score. So therefore max score will become 23. Okay, next time through the loop, 44. That is greater than 23, so we're going to update max score once more. You can see that's happened here. Next time through the loop, it's 10, so that's not greater than it, so it won't change. Then we've got 78, so it will update once more there. And finally, we're going to have 5, and so it will stay at 78, and our list has been exhausted. So we go down to the final statement, and we print out that the highest score is 78. So hopefully by now you're seeing how that's working, and you can adjust your program to find the lowest score, and then also create a slightly different version that might find the average score. For the average, you're probably going to need to work out the length of that list, and remember you can use the len function to do that. So pause the video now, make sure you can create a loop that works out the maximum, the minimum, and then the average, not all at once but separately, and then come back to this video and we'll get on to the guessing game challenge. So your challenge now for the guessing game is to add a list to your game, and in that list I want you to add or append all of the guesses that the user makes. Then once they've finally got the answer correct, I want you to print out from that list all of the guesses that they took throughout the game. Pause the video now, have a go at that, and then come back and we'll have a look at one way of doing this. So welcome back, I hope you managed to get your guessing game up and running. Let's just recap the few lines of code that we need to add to create a list and then to append the guesses as we go. So up here before my loop starts, I've created my empty list. It's really important that's before the loop. If you do that inside the loop, every time you go back around, you'll reset your list back to an empty list. So I've got that line of code there, creating guess list. Then inside my loop, if they've created an accurate guess, or one that meets both the criteria of being an integer, which we check here, and also within the range that we want, which we check here, after that, we then append the guess to the guess list. That's all we need to populate that list, and then at the end of our program, once they've successfully guessed the number, we have a loop, just like the ones we looked at for the numbers in guess list. We're going to print the numbers out. So if we run that just to test what it's going to look like, and you can see here I've still got my debugging print statement there, so we know the answer is 33. So I'll go for 25, too low, 35, too high, 33, which should be correct, and now you can see it prints out my guesses there. Now we might want to improve the output a little bit there. I'm going to put in an empty print statement there just to create a blank line there, and I also want to print out the number of guesses that we've got as we go. Now there are a few different ways of doing this, but the easiest way is to use a different variable. So I'm going to call it count, and this is going to count the number of times that we go through the loop, and each time we go through the loop it's going to increase by 1. So underneath that print statement I'm going to use this syntax count plus equals 1, which will increment or increase that variable by 1 every time we go through the loop. That will enable us to have output that says guess 1, guess 2, guess 3, and so on. So the next thing we have to do is then put that into our print statement, and I'm going to use the string formatting that we looked at back near the start. So I'm going to have, instead of print num, I'm going to have an output string. So I'm going to want to say guess, and then the number, or the number of the guess, which would be 1, 2, 3, and so on. So I need to put in my curly brackets there. Then I'll put in a colon, and I'll put another set of curly brackets, which is going to be where our number goes, or the actual guess goes. So remember, I need to close my string, put dot format, and then in the brackets that I've got here, I need to put the variables that I want to take the place of these curly brackets. So the first one is going to be the variable count, and the second one is going to be the variable num in this case, because we're taking the num from the guess list. Okay, let's run that and see if that's going to work. Okay, so here we go. We can see that our guesses are printed out, and it's nicely formatted along with some output that will show the number of guesses that we've taken. Experiment with that in your program. I've added a little bit here to our looping through the list that we hadn't looked at before, but it's a really useful thing to be able to do, to include a counter inside your for loop so that you can have output like this.